That's that momentum I was talking about. That it all kind of feeds itself and it grows and it grows and it grows. And provided you're writing good material and you're a good band that people have an interest in and they want to see you, I mean, and that's a whole nother kind of creative side of it. And that's kind of to each band themselves, you know what I mean, is whether you've got something of interest. But let's face it, we all know a lot of bands that were sort of hack and maybe kind of like, what's the appeal of that got big because they had the momentum, they knew how to market themselves, they had a record company who believed in them, putting a lot of money into them, and that just kind of keeps the whole thing moving along. I think all bands at some point reach this point where, you know, your biggest days are behind you, right? And then it becomes a trick of, okay, well, how do I now capitalize on this to keep this rolling? You know, I mean, you see bands like Lynyrd Skynyrd, for instance. I mean, these guys have stayed on the road forever, you know, and obviously their big hits were Freebird, you know, big things back in the 70s. But here we are, you know, in 2006, you know, and groups are moving forward and keeping their name out, and then at that point you either become yesteryear's nostalgia or you figure out a way to kind of reinvent that and make that cool, and you know, there's a lot of fans that still want to come out and see that, you know? So there's that side of it. What I'm currently doing right now with F5 and some other things that I'm doing is I'm using the internet and, you know, really kind of almost a DIY indie style to start these groups and do these things that I'm doing. So I like what you guys are doing because it's just another part of the equation that helps, you know, put the name out there, and it's still the same, you know, making videos, making records, getting publicity, using the internet to get that buzz out there. I mean, let's face it, the internet buzz is huge. I mean, you know, magazines are to some degree maybe reaching less and less people, and they, except for their kind of core readers that read those magazines, they don't seem to have the reach maybe that they used to, only because the internet has just, it's easier to just hop on the internet, check a website and go, what happened today? Oh, cool, done. It's like reading the newspaper versus having to go down to the newsstand, pay $5-6, buy the magazine that only comes out once a month, and you know, in the news, I mean, news travels so quick these days that, you know, what you read in the magazine, you know, in March, you already heard about back in February. It's already yesterday's news, you know. So you need all of it, but I like the internet mentality of point, click, what is it, done, next, move on to the next thing. I think it's cool.
That kind of what you were talking about with the way that it's changing and stuff. What would you say one of the biggest changes in how, like, the record companies are doing business now? Like, it seems to me like back 20 years ago, they'd put all their marbles in one bag and bank on one band to make it. And now it kind of, throughout the last few years, it's been kind of where they're like spreading out and getting all these other bands and maybe putting a little less money into them, but having more success with more of them.
Yeah,
would you agree with that? Or?
I would agree with that, and I think a lot of it too is that, you know, back in the probably the 50s, 60s, certainly in the Motown era, you know, their concept, it was more singles oriented, right? So that's why there were jukeboxes with 45s. Like any burger diner you go to, you got the little jukebox thing, and they were singles, and on one side was the hit, and then there was a B side. And that was really more how the record industry started working, and I believe it was probably closer into like the 70s, maybe the late 60s, but the 70s when the concept of the LP, long play, which started with 12-inch records and of course now today are CDs, that concept happened where, you know, people weren't just interested in hearing a single on the radio or they could just buy a single from an artist. They wanted to hear a whole body of work. And then when it became more about the big, you know, the artwork and the lyrics, and it kind of turned into that thing, and that was how we all built fans, you know. But today, because of the internet, and probably started with iTunes, you know, and these download sites, it's kind of going back to being more of a singles market, you know. So there, as a result, is record companies aren't spending as much money to develop an artist because contracts, you know, record contracts traditionally are multiple album, meaning that, you know, you work one album and then you do another, and maybe it's 3 or 4, and record companies used to be able to spend the time and the money developing an artist for 3, 4, 5 albums, knowing that, okay, if the first record doesn't do it, we have the chance of the second, the third to develop a career. But today, the disadvantage that bands have is that it's not a career-oriented society anymore. It's more about singles, and so when you think about it, to some degree, you spend a lot of time, you spend a lot of money writing, 30 songs so you can get 12 good ones to put on a record, out of which only 1 or 2 are going to become a single on the radio and a video.
Right.
And while you can go out and play and develop a fan base, more of it comes down to the band. The band has to go on the road. They've got to use all these resources to tour and get out there and do it, because record companies aren't funding it anymore. I mean, there's a few of the big ones, of course, that they do, but less, and they're picking a couple more, like you said, of the guys are having to go into a real cheap,
Right.
get real creative, and do sponsorships and endorsements and all these different things to try to make enough money to be able to tour. So it started indie, it went major, and now it's kind of back to very much being, the indies pretty much run the record business right now.
Right. So another thing I was thinking was that being in a very platinum selling band that you were in for 20 years,
Right.
and then now doing your new project, which is F5.
Right.
Let's talk about F5.
Sure, yeah.
And like what you guys are doing and how you're having to market yourself
Right.
and do this all over again, kind of.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Oh, it's believe me, it's just like 1986 all over again, or 85 even for me, when back in the indie thing. But the good news about it is there's a lot more indies out there. Most of the record industry is the indies. I mean, there's really only like 4 major labels that distribute all of the records for the indies. So more people are rolling up their sleeves, getting down in the trenches, and working harder to try to make the thing work, because they know realistically the chance of just signing some big, golden parachute record deal with Warner Brothers, it's probably not going to happen. And if it does happen, it's probably going to happen the way it did, with our group years ago, which is you got to sell a bunch of records, you got to be on the road, you got to be making some noise and landing on the radar screen quite a bit before record companies go, who's this F5 thing here? I don't know. Maybe we'll pay attention to that. For me, I don't want to wait around for that stuff, And the worst thing I think an artist can do is sit around and do nothing, and dream about, well, if only I had this, or they'll recognize my genius one day. That's the worst thing you can do. So, to me, I'd rather be out gigging and playing, and, we just released a new video, and our record came out in 2005. I'd rather just be out doing it, because if you're out doing it, at least you're in the game, And if you're in the game, you got a chance of winning the game. So, and that certainly beats sitting on the sidelines any day. So for me, it's just about being active and staying out there doing it, and of course making sure the quality of what I do is as good as it can possibly be.
Yeah, then that's kind of what your it's a passion, and we gotta kind of go with that and just go with our heart, I think, and
Absolutely.
a lot of that stuff.
Right.
So F5,
Mm-hmm.
What's that all about? Who is it? How'd you guys hook up?
Well, in 2002, I put together a production company, and with the sole idea of finding new talent and producing and developing them and trying to sign them to record deals. And that was really kind of right at a critical point of the record industry when things were going from the big major label thing to the indie thing. So what it did for me is it put me in touch with a lot of new music, young musicians playing new kinds of music. Keep in mind, I'd done kind of one thing for a long time. It was good for me actually to leap out of the nest, work with some new guys, see how they approach guitars, how they approach music. Their tunings are different, their rhythm structures are different, and it really was a great eye-opening experience to me. And that was how I met all the other guys in F5, who are relatively unknown guys, but I had discovered them through working with their groups, producing them in the studio. Their bands either didn't get signed, they broke up, they split off into new things, but I stayed in touch with with those guys, particularly guitar player Steve Conley, Dave Smaller, drummer, and Dale Steele, our singer.